Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington, where it's been yet another historic day that will shape the future of American politics. The House of Representatives passing President Trump's signature domestic policy legislation. It includes trillions of dollars in tax cut extensions, hundreds of billions in new funding for the president's immigration crackdown, and dramatic cuts to entitlement programs like Medicaid. The sprawling bill passed after a grueling 48 hours of arm twisting, closed-door negotiations, and marathon rounds of voting on the House floor. It all led to this.
The motion is adopted.
The moment Speaker Johnson gavelled in the final vote by an incredibly slim margin, 218 to 214. Largely on party lines, with Republicans Thomas Massey of Kentucky and Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania voting with all the Democrats against the legislation. After the vote, Speaker Johnson signed it and gave credit to his conference for getting the bill passed.
The beauty of unified government is this is exactly how it can work and how it's supposed to work, is that you have an interaction between the executive and the legislative branches, because that's what's best for the people. And that coordination is going to yield great results. They're going to feel this pretty quickly. Wages will rise. I think household income will go up. I think the job participation rate will increase dramatically. I think unemployment will be low.
The bill now heads to the president's desk, where he's expected to hold a signing ceremony tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The White House also says the president will speak at length about the bill at his event in Iowa tonight. In a statement, the White House celebrated the bill, saying the pro-growth policies will lead to, quote, an economic boom like never seen before. Getting his major piece of legislation over the finish line was tumultuous at best and did not come without some major hurdles and delay tactics. Starting yesterday, when the House held open a procedural vote for more than 7 hours, making it the longest vote in modern congressional history. Speaker Johnson continued to work behind the scenes to corral his conference and assuage concerns that the bill's steep cuts to Medicaid could backfire on them politically. And then today, we saw Democrats' final stand against the president's mega bill, with Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries delivering a record-breaking 8-hour and 44-minute speech on the House floor, railing against the bill.
And that's exactly what every single Democrat stands in strong opposition to this bill, because we're standing up for the American people. This reckless Republican budget is an immoral document. We're going to continue as House Democrats to take our sweet time on behalf of the American people, because the issues are too significant. We're going to press on until victory is won. I yield back.
Jeffries clearly looking to fire up Democrats about their prospects in next year's midterms, even going so far as to nickname that effort Project 2026. And joining me now is our team of reporters, NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, and NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Romans. Thank you all so much for joining me. Sahil, I want to start with you, though. What's the mood like on Capitol Hill right now that the Republicans were able to get the president's bill across the finish line? And what does it say about the politics of this moment and the power the president continues to wield over the party?
Well, Gabe, Republican leaders are certainly very elated right now. They have good reason to be. Usually it takes multiple laws to pass provisions of this magnitude, but they made a pretty daring bet that they could stack the president's entire domestic agenda, really everything they could fit through this budget reconciliation process in one massive package, $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, more than $1 trillion in spending cuts, and that just about every Republican in these narrow majorities would ultimately vote for it. And to that end, they were right, despite all the complaining, despite all the criticisms and the objecting that we heard from Republicans across the spectrum throughout, from politically vulnerable members to some of the most conservative hardline members, nearly every one of them folded in the end and said they are not going to say no to President Trump's agenda. And that was the ace in the hole that Republican leaders had all along. That absolutely speaks to the level of power that President Trump has accumulated. The Republican Party, if a decade ago, had various different power centers, that would have the backs of members to make serious demands, to push for their own priorities and withhold votes unless they were met. Those factions are all gone now. They've all collapsed into one Donald Trump. He's the only game in town. Just two Republicans at the end of the day were willing to say no to him. One of them is Tom Massey of Kentucky. He has opposed Trump in the past and survived re-election. He told me he has Trump antibodies for that. And the second one is Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick. This one was a little bit of a surprise. He represents one of the very few districts that President Trump lost in 2024 and is still represented by a Republican. He said the Medicaid cuts go too far for him. Gabe.
And Monica, speaking of the president's power, what do we know about his role in flipping those key votes?
It seems like it was key, Gabe. He was really engaged yesterday for almost the entire day, either in meetings, in person with some of these holdouts who came to the White House to express their final concerns, and on the phone. He was even speaking with key members, key lawmakers, and with the House Speaker around 1 a.m. this morning, trying to really get all of this finalized and get it to where it was able to pass this afternoon. Now, the president had even said he was okay with the deadline sliding a little bit. This was a self-imposed July 4th deadline that he had put out there. But then ultimately, the fact that it did pass today and that he's going to be able to sign it tomorrow with a lot of fanfare, I might add, at the White House. He's going to essentially attach this bill signing to a previously planned military family picnic that is taking place on the South Lawn to mark the holiday. And then he's going to cap the evening off with the traditional White House 4th of July celebration where they gather to watch fireworks. And the fact that there are even going to be some flyovers to additionally celebrate the military is really going to cap a day, I think, for this president that he's going to call historic, that he's going to tout as a major, major victory. Now, that's how we got to this point. And that, again, the president will be somebody who I think takes a lot of credit for his work as it got very close to the 1 yard line. But now this larger question is raised about how he will answer for some of the provisions in the bill that are not as popular. And the White House is already trying to dismiss those today, saying that this is going to create a lot of growth in the economy. They're going to try to put it and market it that way. But then, of course, there are these answers for candidate Trump, who claimed he would not make cuts to Medicaid, now with the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office saying as many as 11 million people will be stripped of their health care as a result of this law. Gabe.
Monica, you mentioned what we expect from the president tomorrow. Have we heard from the president so far himself yet this afternoon? I know he's heading to Iowa later on tonight, right?
Yeah, and the White House says that much of his speech tonight is going to be dedicated to this major legislative victory. He spent an earlier part of the afternoon meeting with freed hostage Idan Alexander, who was in Hamas captivity for more than 580 days. The White House put out a video of that earlier today. So he's been attending to some other matters, the White House says, and again, he's trying to perhaps get an Israel and Hamas ceasefire over the finish line for next week. We know the Israeli prime minister is set to come to meet with President Trump, so he's trying to juggle a couple of those different things. And then tonight is supposed to be the speech. But as he leaves the White House, as he so often does, Gabe, when he gets to Air Force One, it's possible he could talk with reporters there, because you better believe he's going to want to spike the ball, so to speak, on this big victory. And
like usual, busy times on the White House beat, Monica. Sahil, I want to turn back to you. Minority Leader Jeffries delayed the vote for almost nine hours, as we said. What is next for Democrats here? What's the messaging strategy going forward?
Well, Democrats certainly didn't have the votes to torpedo this bill, despite their best efforts, and that's because Republicans used a process where they can pass it on their own, using their majorities and bypassing a filibuster in the Senate. But what Democrats can do is, A, try to win the battle of public opinion. So far, polls indicate they are winning the battle of public opinion. This bill is not popular. A recent Fox News poll found that this bill is about 20 points underwater with the country at large. That is the point that Democrats are going to try to press forward. They're going to try to capitalize on that and make these Republicans pay a political price in the next midterm election. And to that end, take a listen to what Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who's trying to become Speaker of the House next time, said in his record-breaking speech.
Well, I know that there are people concerned with what's happening in America, but understand what our journey teaches us is that after Project 2025 comes Project 2026. And you will have an opportunity to end this national nightmare.
Now, the argument you will hear over and over and over again from Democrats is that Republicans are cutting taxes for the wealthiest Americans and for billionaires, paying for it by cutting health care, Medicaid, and food stamps for the working class. It's very reminiscent of the message that Democrats used in 2018 ahead of that blue wave when Republicans then tried to repeal the ACA unsuccessfully, but passed the original Trump tax cut, which has now just been extended.
So, Sahil, you mentioned this tax cut extension. Also, everybody's been talking about the changes to Medicaid. When will people actually start to feel the impact of what's in this bill?
Yeah, let's look at a timeline on this. The Trump tax cuts were set to expire at the end of this year. They will not expire. They have now been extended. So starting 2025, next year, those Trump tax cuts will largely continue in existing form, but with some changes. No tax on tips and overtime. There's a temporary provision for 4 years that include those two. It's not really clear exactly how many people would benefit from no tax on tips, for instance, because there's a deduction there. The vast majority of those workers, or at least a very, very significant number of them, don't pay enough in taxes to really benefit from that deduction. The food stamp work requirement starts as early as 2025, and the Medicaid work requirements, one of the most significant pieces of this, starts on the last day of 2026 at the latest, although there seems to be some flexibility that allows states to trigger them earlier. So the savings are going to come a little bit later. Republicans backloaded the savings and some of the most aggressive cuts until after the midterm elections.
And thanks for that timeline. Sahil, what are some of the other winners and losers of this bill?
Yeah, we can consider several of them, Gabe. For the winners, the biggest winners are high-earning taxpayers. There will be some, tipped workers and those who make overtime who will pay less in taxes as a result of this. The fossil fuel industry is a real winner because the government just took away a bunch of incentives for clean energy. Stephen Miller and the architects of the mass deportation agenda, huge winners. They now get more than $100 billion to carry out that agenda. The military gets a boost of $100 billion as well, more than that. And as far as the losers go, it's going to be Medicaid and SNAP recipients. Millions of them are going to lose their coverage or have to fill out these new paperwork requirements, proving their eligibility, proving they're working at least 80 hours a month. Republicans have argued that these are just able-bodied adults who should be required to work, not people with disabilities or people who have young kids. So they're going to press that point again and again. The question is how many people are going to fall through the cracks as a result of this red tape. Hospitals and providers, some of them are all going to take a hit. There's one rural hospital in Nebraska that's already announced it's closing, cash strapped. Things are going to get worse as a result of this bill. And the clean energy industry, big loser in this bill, about $500 billion in incentives were taken away. Lastly, Gabe, deficit hawks, massive losers in this bill. Despite the messaging from Republicans, this bill increases the deficit by more than $3 trillion, according to the Congressional Budget Office.
And Monica, I want to go quickly back to you. We talked about the role that the president played here, but do we know exactly what he offered to get some of these GOP holdouts on board?
Well, senior White House officials don't want to get too specific on that because they really point out that obviously nothing changed between the Senate version and the House version that ultimately passed, because had there been any kind of amendment or even a change to a single word, it would have had to go back through that process. So they're trying to argue that really this was more of the president being willing to hear their concerns, to have a conversation, but that there weren't going to be any side deals as it relates to this particular legislation. But what we've heard from some House members who were part of these conversations is the idea that the president did promise on future conversations about future legislation or other kinds of ideas of legislation that could come up in the future that he would be willing to perhaps listen to their input or give them what they were looking for. But in the end, there isn't any kind of a real concession here that had to be made. The Republicans who had all of their issues raised ultimately in the end said, OK, I'm going to get in line and get behind the president. Gabe.
Monica Alba at the White House, Sahil Kapur on Capitol Hill. We thank you. Now I want to turn to Christine Romans, our senior business correspondent, who has been waiting so patiently. Christine, thank you for that. As Monica noted, well, first, I want you to kind of take a step back here and give us the bigger picture here. As Monica noted, the president has been posting about this. He's been touting this as a pro-growth piece of legislation. Give us a reality check. What will the economic impact of this legislation be?
I mean, the benefits go predominantly to high earners and companies. You know, you've got this 100% write-off that so many businesses were really happy about, and writing off research and development. And so the Treasury Secretary is saying just the clarity for business that this has been resolved, this tax limbo hanging over them has been resolved, and that will be explosive for the American economy. That's the position of the White House. Then you have the hospital industry and the healthcare industry, which, for example, and today's jobs report showed another month of strong jobs creation. Hospitals have been really important for the economy, especially over the past 20 years or so. They're gearing up for these big cuts that will affect them. And their perspective is this, you know, Medicaid isn't a check that goes into a poor person's pocket. It's money that goes to pay a lab tech, a janitor, a doctor, a nurse, a hospital. And so they're really concerned about what that's going to mean overall for the economy.
And Christine, first of all, the markets did very well today. At least that's what the White House has been saying. We also, as you said, we got that latest jobs report. The U.S. adding 147,000 jobs in the month of June, unemployment falling to 4.1%. You touched on this a little bit, but what should we make of those numbers?
You know, it's still a resilient job market, and it's been remarkable. This has been a job market you haven't been able to count down in the past 3 or 4 years. But you look under the hood, and you can see half of that job creation was from state and local governments. You had federal jobs lost. We're just the tip of the spear of probably those DOGE cuts starting to affect that. And so that's not sustainable when so much of the job creation is not the private sector, but the state and local government. So we're going to watch that really, really closely here. And again, you've got more deadlines, trade deadlines looming, with still waiting for some clarity. But stocks seem to think the president is not going to put big tariffs on again. So we'll see. Maybe they're wrong. Yeah,
certainly a lot to watch. And now that you mention it, why not talk more about that? The president's July 9th tariff deadline is also nearing. That's next week. Hard to believe. But what could that mean for businesses and consumers? I know he announced a trade deal with Vietnam, but are we expecting more?
Well, we need more details, too. As you know, I mean, the president puts in social media posts progress, but we haven't seen this stuff papered up yet, right? So that's what we're really kind of waiting for. And the Treasury Secretary keeps saying that, look, if you're not negotiating in good faith, you could have a big tariff put on you on July 9th. But clearly, business and markets don't want that. The question is, how much progress are they really making, and will these tariff rates change? You know, Gabe, if you're a business owner and you're getting ready for the big holiday shopping season, you still don't know for sure what your tariff rates are going to be, what the costs are going to be at the borders and the ports come October 1st. And so the worry is that uncertainty has a chilling effect on hiring in the weeks and months ahead.
Our senior business correspondent, Christine Romans, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.